The sound of the diesel engine turning over was what woke me. It was 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, a time when the only sounds I expected to hear were the rustle of the cottonwoods down by the creek and the low whistle of the coffee maker finishing its cycle. This sound was different. It was a guttural, earth-moving growl, an affront to the quiet order of my morning. I walked to the kitchen window, my ceramic mug warm in my hands, and looked out across the eastern pasture. There, sitting just inside my fence line, was a Caterpillar D6 bulldozer, its yellow paint obscene against the soft green of the spring grass. A man in a hard hat was at the controls, and next to him, pointing with an imperious sweep of her arm, was Karen Bishop. She was dressed in what she probably considered practical work attire: a pink windbreaker, pristine white tennis shoes, and a visor that did little to shade the smug certainty on her face. She was the president of the Eagles Crest Homeowners Association, the sprawling subdivision that had sprouted up over the last decade, pressing right against the eastern boundary of my ranch. She was pointing at the 100-year-old live oaks that stood sentinel on a small rise, a place my wife Eleanor and I had often picnicked. The bulldozera's blade tilted downward, biting into the soil. I did not run out. I did not shout. I simply took a sip of my coffee, the bitterness of it grounding me. I retrieved my phone from the counter, opened the camera application, and began to record. I zoomed in on the property steka I had driven myself years ago, its metal cat bearing my own surveyor's registration number, then panned slowly to the bulldozer, its tracks a good 50 feet on my side of that stake. I captured Karen's animated gestures, her mouth moving as she issued commands. Then, I put the phone in my pocket, slipped on my boots, and walked outside. The air was cool, but the rumble of the machine was a physical presence, a vibration in my chest. I didn't walk toward them. I walked to my gate, the one that opened onto the pasture they had accessed. It was an old, heavy iron gate, secured by a thick chain and a formidable-looking padlock. I had left it unlocked, as I often did when I was home. I swung it closed now. The clang of the iron latch was definitive. I wrapped the chain, threaded the lock through its links, and clicked it shut. I pocketed the key. Only then did they notice me. The bulldozer operator saw me first, his hands hesitating on the levers. He nudged Karen. She turned, and her face, which had been a mask of triumphant command, curdled into annoyance. She strode toward me, her new sneakers leaving dark prints in the damp earth she was so eager to claim. "Arthur," she called out, her voice sharp and carrying easily over the idling engine. "What do you think you're doing? Open this gate immediately." I stood on my side of the gate, my hands resting on the cool iron bars. I said nothing. I just watched her approach. "Did you hear me?" she demanded, stopping a few feet away. "This is HOA common property. We are beginning construction of the new community clubhouse. You are interfering with a sanctioned project." I looked past her, at the raw scar the bulldozer had already carved into my pasture. I looked at the oaks, their roots now fretted. I met her gaze. "You are trespassing, Karen," I said, my voice even. "Your equipment and your personnel are on my private property." She laughed, a short, sharp bark that was more disbelief than humor. "Don't be ridiculous. This has been used by the community for years. It is ours. The HOA board voted on it. Our survey confirms it." She puffed out her chest slightly, a gesture of authority I had seen her use at many a contentious HOA meeting. "I am the president of the Eagles Crest HOA. I am ordering you to open this gate and cease this harassment. If you don't, I will call the sheriff and have you fined for obstruction." I kept my hands on the gate. I looked at her, at the bulldozer operator who was now watching us with a worried expression, and at the land, my land. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, quickly suppressed by a fresh wave of indignation. She truly believed her own words. She believed her title gave her the power to reshape reality, to move property lines with the force of her will in a board vote. I finally spoke, my voice quiet but clear. "Go ahead and call the sheriff, Karen. I would welcome it." I then raised my phone, which had been recording video the entire time. "And please, for the record, state your name and your official title again. The deputy will need it for the report." She had no idea. She had no idea that the gate wasn't there to keep her out. It was there to keep her in. She had just, with her own machine and her own mouth, provided the final, perfect, unimpeachable piece of evidence I needed. The whole thing was on video. The trespass, the damage, the claim, the threat. She had no idea that this wasn't the beginning of a fight. It was the end of a long, quiet, and meticulously documented war that she had already lost. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how a simple property line dispute escalated into a $4 million mistake on her part. It didn't start with a bulldozer. It never does. It started with roses. And a folder. A simple manila file folder with the words Eagle's Crest HOA written on the tab in my precise architectural script. My name is Arthur Finch. For 45 years, I was a licensed civil engineer and land surveyor. I spent my life in a world of absolutes, of plumb lines and transits, of deeds and easements, of things that were true on paper and therefore true in the world. When my wife Eleanor passed away 5 years ago, the silence in our suburban home became unbearable. So I sold it and bought this placea, 300 acres of rolling hills and oak groves, the last piece of the old Rocking R ranch. It was meant to be a quiet retreat, a place to read and walk the land, to live out my days in peace. The ranch shared a long, meandering border with the new Eagle's Crest subdivision, a fact that seemed innocuous at the time. I am, by nature, a non-confrontational man. I believe in rules and process. I believe that most disputes can be resolved by a calm examination of the facts. Eleanor used to say I had the patience of a tectonic plate. I observe, I measure, I document. I do not act until I have a complete and total understanding of the terrain. It was a professional habit that had bled over into every aspect of my life. The Eagle's Crest Homeowners Association was formed shortly after I moved in, and from the very beginning, Karen Bishop was its driving force. She was a woman who thrived on control, a petty tyrant in a kingdom of cul-de-sacs. She wasn't elected for her wisdom or her fairness, but for her sheer, relentless energy. She organized the holiday decorating contests, she managed the community pool schedule, and she wielded the HOA's book of covenants and restrictions like a broadsword. Her first victim was old Mr. Henderson in Lot 42. He was a widower, in his 80s, who had a passion for growing prize-winning roses. His front yard was a masterpiece of color and fragrance. But his prize-winning peace rose bush had a single errant branch that grew approximately 4 inches over the public sidewalk. Karen, citing a vague rule about manicured public-facing landscapes, began fining him. $25 a week. Mr. Henderson, a gentle soul, would dutifully trim the branch back, but the rose was vigorous, and he sometimes missed it by a day or two. The fines kept coming. He tried to appeal to the board, but Karen was the board. She controlled the agenda, the minutes, and the vote. I watched from a distance as she publicly shamed him at a meeting, calling him a rebellious resident who was damaging the aesthetic integrity of our community. He was heartbroken. He ended up digging out the entire rose garden, replacing it with sterile HOA-approved gravel and succulents. It was then that I started the folder. I didn't have a plan. It was just instinct. I printed out the HOA covenants. I printed out the county property maps. When my own lawn got a little long while I was recovering from the flu, I received a violation notice from Karen. It was aggressive and condescending. I paid the $50 fine without protest. I did not even bother to appeal. But I made a photocopy of the check and the notice, and I placed them in the folder. I kept the receipts. This became my quiet habit. Every broadcast email she sent, filled with thinly veiled threats and passive-aggressive reminders, was printed and filed. Every notice, every new rule she unilaterally implemented, every fee she levied at all went into the folder. On paper, her reign was a meticulous record of overreach and abuse. The origin of the Clubhouse dispute was a small kindness, an oversight that she, in her arrogance, mistook for a weakness. The far northeastern corner of my property was a 5-acre parcel of open pasture that crested a small hill. It was picturesque. From the beginning, some of the subdivision families would walk over and have picnics there. They were respectful, they cleaned up after themselves, and I didn't mind. It was a harmless use of a piece of land I rarely visited. Eleanor would have liked seeing the children play there. Karen saw it differently. She didn't see a shared space born of unspoken goodwill. She saw an asset to be seized. It started small. An official HOA-sponsored picnic was announced. Then, a permanent charcoal grill was installed, without anyone asking my permission. I let it slide. It seemed too petty to argue over. But then came the plans for a gazebo. This was a different order of magnitude. That was when I sent my first letter. It was polite, professional, and clear. I included a copy of my deed and the relevant section of the official county plat map, highlighting my property line. I explained that while I had been happy to allow informal recreational use of the land, the construction of a permanent structure was not permissible. I sent it via standard mail. There was no response. 2 weeks later, a truck arrived and unloaded a pallet of lumber. This was the moment of truth. She was calling my bluff, assuming the old man on the ranch was all talk. She had no idea that for me, the letter wasn't a threat. It was step one of a very clear and well-defined process. It was the first piece of official documentation in a new section of the folder labeled Clubhouse Dispute. On paper, I had established a record of attempting to resolve the matter amicably. The gazebo was never built. It was as if my polite letter had only served to inflame Karen's ambition. A week after the lumber was delivered, I received the A Glass Crest monthly newsletter. The lead story, accompanied by a garish artist's rendering, announced a bold new vision, not a gazebo, but a magnificent $4 million clubhouse. It would feature a grand hall, a state-of-the-art gym, and an infinity pool overlooking the valley. The location, described as the scenic HOA-owned hilltop, was unmistakably my 5-acre pasture. Pod. She had mistaken my patience for passivity. It was a common error people made when dealing with me. I didn't get angry. I got organized. I went back to my desk and got to work. My first step was to escalate the communication. I drafted a second letter. This one was more formal, citing the specific state statutes regarding trespassing and unlicensed construction. I again included the deed and plat map. I had my lawyer, Ben Carter, review it. He made a few minor tweaks to the legal language, adding a sentence about potential liability for any damages incurred. I sent this letter via certified mail with return receipt requested. This was no longer a neighborly note. This was a legal warning. On paper, her receipt of this warning would be undeniable. The signed green card came back to my post office box a week later. Karen Bishop had personally signed for it. I photocopied it and placed it in the folder. Her response came not in a letter, but in a performance. At the next HOA meeting, according to my subsequent sources, she held up my certified letter for all to see. She called it a pathetic attempt at intimidation by a bitter old recluse who wants to deny our children a place to play. She painted me as the villain, a greedy rancher trying to steal back land that the community had rightfully claimed through historic use. Then, in a moment of high drama, she tore the letter, the deed, and the map into pieces and threw them into a trash can. The room, I was told, erupted in applause. This act, meant to demonstrate her strength, was a profound gift. She had publicly and willfully disregarded a formal legal notice in front of dozens of witnesses. She had no idea she had just handed me the cornerstone of a future claim for punitive damages. It was clear that letters would not suffice. It was time to treat this not as a disagreement with a neighbor, but as a complex engineering and legal problem. I retreated to my home office, the place where I had spent decades drafting plans and reviewing surveys. I called Maria Sanchez, a paralegal I had worked with for 30 years. She was retired now, but her mind was as sharp as a tack. "Arthur," she said, her voice warm over the phone, "I thought you were done with this kind of work." "I thought so too, Maria," I replied, "but I have a personal project that requires semi-thorough documentation." I explained the situation. She was quiet for a moment, and then she let out a low whistle. She tore up a certified letter in a public meeting. "Oh, Arthur, this woman is a special kind of foolish." For the next 2 weeks, Maria and I worked. We did not focus on the clubhouse. We focused on the foundation of everything. From a secure online portal, we pulled the original 1887 land grant that established the Rocking R Ranch. We pulled every subsequent deed transfer, every survey, every zoning change, recorded by the county. We built an unbroken chain of title stretching back over 130 years. My ownership was not just clear, it was biblically absolute. Then, we pulled the documents for the Eagles Crest subdivision itself, their master plan, their articles of incorporation, their own official plat maps submitted to the county, and the TAS when we found it. The bombshell. On the subdivisiona's own engineering plans, the ones filed with the county and signed off on by their own engineers, there was a thick dotted line running directly through my 5-acre pasture. It was labeled primary drainage, easement county maintained. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. I knew what this meant. Before the subdivision was built, all the rainwater from this watershed flowed naturally down the hill and into the creek on my property. To prevent the new homes from flooding, the developers had been required by the county to construct a sophisticated drainage system, a network of underground pipes and French drains that channeled all the stormwater into this one specific easement. The easement acted like a massive, natural gutter, carrying the water safely away. My pasture wasn't just my private land, it was the critical piece of infrastructure that kept the entire Eagles Crest development from turning into a swamp every time it rained. The plans were explicit. The easement had to be kept clear of all permanent structures. The weight of what Karen was about to do settled on me. She wasn't just building on my land. She was building a $4 million dam on the one thing that protected her entire community from catastrophic flooding. But it got better. As part of her proposal to the HOA, Karen had submitted a new survey map, one that conveniently showed the 5-acre parcel as unassigned community tract. It looked official enough to the untrained eye. But at the bottom, in the surveyor's block, was a name and license number. Maria ran the name. He wasn't a surveyor. He was Karen's nephew, a licensed home inspector from 2 states over. The license number he'd used belonged to a deceased surveyor from Florida. The document wasn't just wrong, it was a forgery. It was fraud. I sat back in my chair, the document spread across my desk. The folder was now nearly 3 inches thick. I had the chain of title. I had the certified mail receipt. I had the official county-filed engineering plans showing the easement. And now, I had proof of felony-level fraud. She was preparing to build a clubhouse. I was preparing a case that would not only dismantle the building, but dismantle her entire life. On paper, she was already ruined. The world just hadn't caught up yet. The day the bulldozer arrived was the day theory became reality. All the paper, all the documentation, had to be tested against the physical world. When Karen Bishop strode across my pasture and demanded I open the gate, she was operating in her world of performance, of asserted reality. When I told her to call the sheriff, I was inviting the real world, the world of process and verifiable fact, to come and be a witness. She took the bait. Fuming, she pulled out her phone and stabbed at the screen. "I certainly will," she snapped. "I'm calling the sheriff to report a hostile individual illegally detaining our contractor and trespassing on HOA property." It was a masterful performance of victimhood. She was projecting, accusing me of the very thing she was doing. I simply leaned against the gate and waited. The bulldozer operator had shut down the machine, and the sudden silence felt heavy. He looked deeply uncomfortable, a working man caught in a fight he wanted no part of. I spent the 20 minutes it took for a cruiser to arrive. Just observing, I noted the time, I noted the position of the sun, I noted the specific species of wildflowers being crushed beneath the bulldozer's tracks. Details matter. A county sheriff's deputy, a young woman with a calm and professional demeanor, pulled up, her name tag read. Karen rushed to her, launching into a breathless, agitated narrative. "Thank goodness you're here, officer. This man, Arthur Finch, has locked our contractor on our property and is refusing to let him leave. This is the designated site for our new community clubhouse, and he is trying to intimidate us." Deputy Miller listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She let Karen finish her entire tirade before turning to me. "Sir," she said, her voice neutral, "can you tell me your side of this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesticulate. I simply said, "Good morning, deputy, this is my property. That bulldozer is trespassing and has caused damage to my land. The gate is locked because I am securing my property against further incursion." Karen scoffed loudly. "He's lying. We have the survey. It's HOA land." Deputy Miller held up a hand to silence her. She looked back at me. "Do you have any proof of ownership, sir?" "I do," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a plastic document protector. Inside were 3 things. My driver's license, a copy of my most recent property tax bill for this specific parcel, with the county assessor's parcel number clearly visible, and a folded certified copy of the county plat map on which I had already highlighted my property boundaries in yellow. I handed them to her, through the bars of the gate. "The property stake is about 50 feet behind that bulldozer, deputy," I said calmly. "Its cap bears my state surveyor registration number, 4732. You can verify it." She took the documents and examined them carefully. She walked over to her patrol car and spoke into her radio, likely running my name and the parcel number. Karen stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She still believed this was a contest of wills, that her status as HOA president outweighed the dry facts on a piece of paper. Deputy Miller returned a few minutes later and handed my documents back. Her expression was still neutral, but her eyes betrayed a new understanding. "The county records confirm this parcel is registered to you, Mr. Finch," she said. She then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, based on the official records, this appears to be a civil dispute over a property line. It's not a criminal matter for me to resolve. However," she added, her gaze hardening slightly, "your equipment is currently on property that, according to the county, belongs to this gentleman. I would advise you to have your operator move it back onto your side of the boundary until this is sorted out in court." Karen's face went crimson. "This is outrageous. Our survey clearly shows this is our land." This was my moment. "Deputy," I said, making sure my voice was clear and loud enough for my phone's audio to pick it up. "For your report, could you please note that I have informed Karen Bishop, president of the Eagle's Crest HOA, that her construction is not only on my private land, but is also directly on top of a primary county-maintained drainage easement. Per County Ordinance 11-4A, any construction on such an easement requires a county engineering review and a variance permit. I have already confirmed with the county planning department that no such permits have been applied for or issued." Deputy Miller's eyebrows shot up. This was new information, and it changed the complexion of the situation. It elevated it from a simple trespassing dispute to a potential violation of county code. She looked from me to Karen, whose face had gone from red to a pale, mottled white. The mention of a specific ordinance, a verifiable fact, had finally pierced her armor of bluster. "We have our permits in order," she stammered. But the conviction was gone. "I'd be happy to see them," I said politely. "As would the deputy, I'm sure." The deputy looked at Karen and waited. Karen, of course, had nothing to show. The silence was damning. Deputy Miller sighed. "Ma'am, I am not going to arrest anyone today, but I am filing a report. And in that report I will be documenting Mr. Finch's claims, the documents he presented, and your failure to provide any countervailing evidence or permits. My official recommendation is that all work stop immediately until you have a court order clarifying the boundary line. If your crew or equipment enters this property again without such an order, it will be considered criminal trespass." She turned to me. "Is there anything else, Mr. Finch?" "Yes, Deputy," I said. "I would like a copy of your report." "Please, and thank you." She nodded. "It will be available in 3 to 5 business days." Karen stood there, momentarily defeated. The authority figure she had summoned to vanquish me had, instead, validated my position. The bulldozer operator, taking his cue, started the machine, backed it carefully off my land, and parked it on the subdivision's side of the fence. Karen, without another word, turned and stalked away. I unlocked the gate. The immediate threat was over. But I knew this was just a skirmish. She wouldn't give up. People like her never do. They just double down. I went back inside, made a fresh pot of coffee, and added a new entry to the log in my folder. The 12th of April, 7:35 a.m., Sheriff's Deputy Miller called the scene report #78B41 filed. Verbal warning for trespass issued to K. Bishop. Another receipt, kept. The confrontation with the sheriff's deputy bought me time, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Karen Bishop was not the type to be deterred by facts or official warnings. Her ego was now fully invested. The clubhouse had become a monument to her authority, and she would not allow it to be stopped by something as trivial as the law. The construction paused for a few days, but then it resumed, with the crews carefully working right up to the perceived property line, a clear act of intimidation. But something had shifted in the community. My quiet, documented resistance had been noticed. A few days after the incident, as I was checking my mailbox at the end of my long driveway, a car slowed down and pulled over. It was a woman I recognized from the HOA meetings, a quiet lady who lived in one of the houses at the bottom of the hill, Mrs. Gable. She looked nervous, glancing around as if she were a spy in enemy territory. "Mr. Finch?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry to bother you." "It's no bother at all," I said, offering a small smile. She wrung her hands. I heard what happened with the sheriff. I just wanted to say a thank you. My husband and we've been so worried about that clubhouse. She leaned closer. Our basement flooded twice during the construction of this subdivision, before they finished the drainage systems. We live right at the bottom of that hill. If she blocks that waterway, She trailed off, her fear palpable. This was the fearful ally. The one who knew the stakes but had been too intimidated to speak up. "I'm doing what I can to ensure it's handled properly," I said reassuringly. Her eyes darted around again. "I have something that might help," she said, her voice dropping even lower. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. "This is from the HOA meeting where she tore up your letter. I record all the meetings just in case. You can hear everything. Her calling you names, her admitting she received the certified mail, the crowd cheering her on. She held it out to me. Please, take it. Maybe it can help." It was a critical piece of evidence. It's so. A third-party, unbiased recording that corroborated my version of events and captured Karen's willful negligence in her own voice. "Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. "This is more helpful than you can imagine." "Thank you," she gave a relieved, watery smile. "Just don't tell her it came from me. She'd make our lives a living hell." "Your name will be kept out of it completely," I promised. Another piece for the folder. A powerful one. The next breakthrough came from an even more unlikely source. An email appeared in my inbox from a generic, anonymous account. The subject line was simply, "Eagles Crest Board." The email was short. "I am a member of the HOA board. I voted against the Clubhouse project but was overruled. Karen is lying to everyone. She's using a fake survey. Attached are the internal board communications and the so-called survey she presented to us. You need to stop her." Attached were 2 PDF files. The first was the fraudulent survey by her nephew. The second was a complete chain of emails between Karen and the other board members. It was a goldmine. It showed her pressuring the dissenting members, promising them the project would proceed with or without their approval. It showed her dismissing my letters as empty threats. It showed her knowingly presenting the fake survey as legitimate. This was the disillusioned insider, David, a man I later learned was a retired accountant who had been bullied into silence by Karen's aggressive tactics. Now I had it all. A 9. A coalition was forming, even if its members were still in the shadows. I was no longer just a lone rancher fighting the HOA. I was the focal point for a community correction. I immediately forwarded the emails and the audio file to my lawyer, Ben Carter. His response was a single line. "This is no longer a civil dispute, Arthur. This is a prosecution." We spent the next week preparing the lawsuit. It was a mountain of paper. A 9-count civil complaint, alleging trespassing, destruction of property, quiet title action, civil conspiracy, and fraud. We asked for an immediate injunction to halt construction, financial compensation for the damages, and significant punitive damages against both the HOA and Karen Bishop personally. Just as we were preparing to file, Karen made her final desperate move. It was the classic blunder of a cornered tyrant. She escalated. One evening, a process server came to my door. He handed me a thick envelope. It was a petition for a temporary restraining order, filed by Karen Bishop against me. I read the document with a growing sense of incredulity. In her sworn affidavit, she claimed that I was a menace. She said I was constantly lurking at the edge of my property, spying on the construction workers, and that my threatening presence was causing her severe emotional distress. She was asking a judge to order me to stay at least 500 feet away from my own property line, effectively making me a prisoner in my own home. It was a work of pure fiction, a pathetic attempt to use the courts as a weapon. But she had no idea what she had just done. By filing this TRO, she had voluntarily submitted herself to the jurisdiction of the court. She had opened the door. She was inviting a judge to look at the situation. It meant we wouldn't have to wait weeks for our own lawsuit to get a hearing. The hearing for her TRO was scheduled in just 72 hours. I called Ben immediately. He laughed when I read him the affidavit. "Oh, she is a gift that keeps on giving. Arthur," he said. "She just handed us a golden ticket. We're not just going to defend against this TRO. We're going to use this hearing to introduce every last piece of evidence we have. We're going to turn her weapon right back around on her." She thought she was cornering me. She thought she was making one last brilliant move to crush me before I could act. She had no idea she had just fast-tracked her own destruction. She had set the stage for the final confrontation, and she had handed us the script. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was Karenas magnum opus, a grand spectacle of self-congratulation. Despite the ongoing legal skirmishes, she had pushed the construction through at a frantic pace. The $4 million clubhouse now stood on my land, a monument to her arrogance, gleaming with fresh paint and new glass. She had invited local news, the county commissioner, and the entire Eagles Crest community. It was to be her coronation. I watched from my porch through a pair of binoculars. I saw the residents gathering, many of them looking uneasy, whispering to each other. I saw Mrs. Gable standing at the back of the crowd, her face a mask of anxiety. I saw David, the disillusioned board member, standing with his arms crossed, a grim set to his jaw. And I saw Karen, resplendent in a royal blue suit, beaming as she moved through the crowd accepting praise. Footnote: my lawyer Ben Carter sat beside me on the porch swing, a thick leather briefcase resting at his feet. "You know," he said, lowering his own binoculars, "in 25 years of practicing law, I've never seen an antagonist so eager to build the gallows from which they will hang." "She believes in her own performance," I said. "She thinks if she acts like she's won, she has." "Today," Ben said with a thin smile, "performance meets paper." We waited. We watched as the county commissioner gave a bland, politically safe speech. We watched as Karen stepped up to the podium, which was set up on the brand-new veranda that was currently situated directly over the main culvert of the drainage easement. Her voice, amplified by a speaker system, washed over the pasture. She spoke of vision, of community, of overcoming obstacles. She painted herself as the heroic leader who had fought for this glorious new amenity against selfish, backward-looking forces. It was a masterful, tear-jerking performance. Finally, the moment arrived. A large red ribbon was stretched across the grand entrance. Karen produced a comically oversized pair of golden scissors. The cameras flashed. The crowd applauded as she snipped the ribbon in two. It was official. The clubhouse was open. That was our cue. Ben picked up his briefcase. I stood, straightened my jacket, and we began to walk, not to the clubhouse, but to where Karen was standing, accepting hugs and handshakes. And a process server we had hired, a large, impassive man named Frank, fell into step beside us. As we approached, the celebratory mood faltered. A nervous hush fell over the group immediately around Karen. She saw us, and her smile tightened into a venomous glare. "What do you want, Arthur?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. "You are not welcome here. This is a private event. I'm not here for the party, Karen," I said quietly. Frank, the process server, stepped forward. "Karen Bishop?" he asked, his voice a formal baritone. "Yes?" she said, annoyed. "You have been served," he said, and extended a thick 9 by 12-inch manila envelope. She looked at it as if it were a snake. "I'm not accepting anything from you," she snapped. "It doesn't matter," Frank said, his voice flat. He gently touched the envelope to her arm. "Service is affected." He then dropped the envelope at her feet and turned, his job complete. The envelope lay on the pristine new pavers. It contained our entire 9-count civil complaint, complete with every exhibit: the deeds, the maps, the fraudulent survey, the hydrological report, the sworn affidavits from David and a half-dozen other residents, and a transcript of Mrs. Gable's audio recording. But the real climax wasn't that moment of public drama. That was just the opening act. The true confrontation came a week later, in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom for the hearing on the TRO she had filed against me. The room was packed. On one side sat Karen, her lawyer, and a few of her staunch supporters from the HOA board. On our side sat myself, Ben, Mrs. Gable, David, and several other residents who had been emboldened to show up. Karen's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a beleaguered community leader, a woman working tirelessly for her neighbors, being harassed and terrorized by an aggressive, unstable old man. Karen herself took the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as she described her fear and emotional distress. It was a convincing performance, filled with trembling lips and righteous indignation. Then, it was Ben's turn. He didn't cross-examine her. He simply said, "Your Honor, we will not be asking Mrs. Bishop any questions. Instead, we would like to present evidence to refute the claims in her affidavit and to demonstrate that it is in fact Mrs. Bishop who is the source of the harassment." The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, nodded. "Proceed, counselor." What followed was not a dramatic argument, but a slow, methodical execution by paper. Ben was like a surgeon. He didn't raise his voice, he simply presented one exhibit after another. "But, Your Honor, for the record, we present Exhibit A, a certified copy of the 1998 deed transferring the 300-acre parcel, including the disputed 5 acres, to Arthur and Eleanor Finch. Exhibit B, the official county plat map, confirming these boundaries. Exhibit C, the certified mail receipt for a legal notice of trespass, signed by Mrs. Bishop on the 2nd of March. With each exhibit, a copy was given to the judge and to Karen's lawyer. I watched Karen. Her confident posture began to sag. Ben continued, his voice a calm drone. Exhibit D, a sworn affidavit from David Miller, a member of the HOA board, stating that Mrs. Bishop knowingly presented a fraudulent survey to the board. Exhibit E, the fraudulent survey itself, alongside a certified statement from the Florida Department of Professional Regulation, stating the license number belongs to a deceased individual. Exhibit F, a complete transcript of the 15th of March HOA meeting, authenticated by the testimony of 3 witnesses present, in which Mrs. Bishop admits to receiving the notice and proceeds to destroy it. Karen's lawyer was on his feet, objecting. "Your Honor, this is all related to a civil property dispute. It has no bearing on the petition for a restraining order." Judge Miller looked down from the bench, her expression grim. "Counselor," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "your client has filed a sworn statement claiming she is being harassed by Mr. Finch on her property. This evidence seems highly relevant to the question of whose property it actually is. Your objection is overruled. Please sit down." The final piece was the bombshell. Ben placed a thick bound report on the clerk's desk. "And finally, Your Honor, Exhibit G, a comprehensive hydrological engineering report, prepared by the firm of Franklin and Associates and peer-reviewed by 2 independent engineers. This report confirms the disputed land contains the primary county drainage easement for the entire Eagles Crest subdivision." Ben walked to the witness stand. "This report concludes, and I quote, the construction of the clubhouse structure has obstructed over 80% of the easement's drainage capacity. In the event of a 50-year storm, a common occurrence in this region, the resulting backup of stormwater would cause catastrophic flooding to at least 70 homes in the lower-lying areas of the subdivision. It further estimates potential property damage in excess of $20 million. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Mrs. Gable began to quietly cry. The faces of Karen's supporters on the board turned ashen. The representative from the HOA's insurance company, who was observing from the gallery, began frantically typing on his phone. This was the moment. The turning point. I watched Karen Bishop's face. The mask of the confident, powerful leader didn't just crack, it disintegrated. Her expression went from defiant anger to blank, slack-jawed shock. Her eyes, which had been flashing with righteous fire, were now wide with the dawning, horrific understanding of her miscalculation. She wasn't just going to lose the clubhouse. She had, through her own willful ignorance, placed her entire community in physical and financial peril. The performance was over. The paper had won. Judge Miller stared down at Karen for a long, silent moment. Mrs. Maz. Bishop, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. Did you, at any point during this project, perform even the most basic due diligence to verify your legal right to build on that land? Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared, her entire world collapsing inward. The collapse was total, silent, and absolute. The verdict, when it came, was less a single moment of triumph and more a cascade of inevitable consequences. Judge Miller didn't just deny Karen's request for a restraining order, she dismissed it, with prejudice, a legal term meaning it could never be filed again. In her ruling from the bench, she called the petition a bad faith, frivolous, and malicious use of the court system, and a transparent attempt to harass a citizen who was lawfully protecting his property right. She then took the extraordinary step of sanctioning Karen personally, ordering her to pay all of my legal fees for having to defend against the TRO. That was only the beginning. Our civil suit was a formality. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the HOA's insurance carrier immediately invoked the willful negligence and fraud exclusion in their policy. They denied the HOA's claim, leaving the association completely exposed. Their lawyers advised them to settle. The settlement conference was short. The HOA agreed to every single one of our demands. They issued a formal public apology. They agreed to pay for the complete demolition of the $4 million clubhouse and the restoration of my pasture to its original condition, under the supervision of an environmental engineer of my choosing. They paid a substantial sum for the damages, the trespass, and my legal fees. But the true fallout was for Karen Bishop. The judge in the civil case, after reviewing the evidence of the forged survey, referred the matter to the district attorney's office. Karen was indicted on felony charges of fraud and forgery. The revelation of her actions, especially the deliberate concealment of the flood risk, sent a shockwave through the Eagles Crest community. A recall petition was started by David and Mrs. Gable, and it garnered signatures from over 90% of the homeowners. In a tense, packed emergency meeting, Karen Bishop was unceremoniously stripped of her presidency and removed from the board. The financial consequences were devastating for her. The court, in the civil judgment, found that her actions constituted fraud, allowing them to pierce the corporate veil of the HOA's limited liability. She was found personally liable for a significant portion of the punitive damages. The HOA, now under new management, also filed its own suit against her to recoup some of their losses. Faced with financial ruin and criminal charges, Karen and her husband sold their house, the one she had lorded over the neighborhood from, and quietly moved away. I never saw her again. The community itself had to face a harsh reckoning. The HOA was forced to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. To pay the settlement to me and cover the astronomical cost of demolishing the clubhouse, A special assessment of nearly $30,000 was levied on every single homeowner in Eagles Crest. It was a bitter, expensive pill to swallow, a tangible consequence of their collective decision to cheer for a bully instead of questioning her. In the months that followed, a slow healing began. A new HOA board was elected, led by the quiet, methodical accountant, David. Their first official act was to rescind every fine Karen had ever issued for things like rose bushes and long grass. They sent letters of apology to people like Mr. Henderson. Their second act was to approach me. David and 2 other board members came to my house, not with demands, but with hats in their hands. They were humbled, respectful. They apologized again, formally, on behalf of the entire community. They asked for my guidance on how to properly manage the area around the now liberated drainage easement. We walked the land together. I showed them the original survey markers. I explained the hydrology of the watershed. We talked for hours. In the end, we came to an agreement. On their side of the property line, they built a modest, beautiful little park with native plants and a simple walking path. I, in turn, drafted and filed a formal limited-use license, granting the residents of Eagles Crest permanent legal access to a 10-foot-wide strip along the edge of my pasture for a trail. The document was precise, its terms and boundaries unmistakable. It was an act of goodwill, but it was done correctly. It was done on paper. Today, as I sit on my porch, I can look out at the eastern pasture. The scar from the bulldozer has faded, replaced by thick, green grass dotted with wildflowers. Where a monument to arrogance once stood, there is only the quiet rustle of the wind through the oaks. Sometimes I see families from Eagles Crest walking on the trail, their children laughing. They wave, and I wave back. They are good neighbors now, born from a hard lesson in boundaries. In my study, hanging on the wall next to my original surveyor's license, is a simple black frame. It doesn't contain a picture. It contains the judge's final order, the one that affirmed my ownership and dismissed Karen's TRO. It's a reminder that the truth, when patiently and meticulously documented, is a force more powerful than any performance, more permanent than any structure built on a lie. The thick manila folder labeled Eagles Crest HOA now sits on a high shelf gathering dust. Its job is done. The receipts have been kept, the accounts have been settled, peace has been restored. Not just on my land, but on the paper that defines it. And in the quiet, orderly world I have rebuilt for myself, that is all that matters.